I'm Dean Obeidallah, and welcome to the Dean Obeidallah Show on Substack Live. And look who I'm joined by. You know him, you love him. It's former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirschner, who also has a great Substack, which if you're not subscribed to, I recommend it 100%. You've got to sign up for it. Go sign up for it right after this conversation. Glenn, thanks for being here, my friend. Nice to see you as always.
Hey, Dean, it's great to be with you.
So, Glenn, like you're busy, you're making a lot of Substack videos. I see it all the time, what's going on. And I want to talk about some of the issues you've raised. One is something that I wrote about for my publication as well. That was the arrest of Judge Dugan in Wisconsin, charged with 2 federal felonies. Like you, I've read the affidavit of the FBI agent. I wanted to get your take on what did you see in terms of the evidence to substantiate this? And also, what's the bigger issue here? Because they didn't have her voluntary surrender. They arrested a judge in public outside of her courthouse.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, I'm a lifelong rule of law guy, Dean, as you well know. So if a judge commits a crime, a judge should be held accountable. But there's a lot that I saw that concerns me. First of all, I have not seen any of the evidence, right? I've heard some
Mhm.
reporting about it. I would like to see sort of a complete, accurate picture of what the judge actually did. But here's what I'll say. When we are investigating potential crime, especially by high profile folk, whether it's in the political world, the business world, judges in the criminal justice system, the one thing we like to make sure of is that our case is buttoned up. It is airtight. So ordinarily, Dean, I was a federal prosecutor for 30 years. Before we would charge somebody like that, and let me hasten to add, crime is crime and criminals are criminals. Whoever violates the law ought to be held accountable. And what I don't want to signal is that, well, look, if you are a career drug dealer, that is your profession of choice, we're going to apply one standard to you in the criminal justice system, and we're going to apply another standard to a judge. There is, however, some truth to the assertion that, look, if you're going to go after a judge where you have separate branches of government concerns at play, you better be buttoned up. So ordinarily, before we would ever charge somebody like that,
Mhm.
we would present all the evidence to a grand jury sitting as the conscience of the community so we wouldn't be accused of running roughshod over a co-equal branch of government, and let the people of the grand jury make the decision. Yes, there's probable cause. The judge violated the law. The judge should be arrested and taken to trial. They didn't do that. It sure looks like they rushed to judgment. And here's the thing, if that case is not buttoned up, then, Pam Bondi and the entire Donald Trump, Department of Justice is going to look really bad and vindictive and petty and lawless if this case ends up falling apart because the evidence isn't really there.
And Glenn, you make such an important point here. This case, the incident happened on Friday, and a week later, they're arresting a judge outside of a courthouse. This was done with speed to send a message because you're absolutely right. They would develop a case, more details. They would go to a grand jury. They present the evidence, and if there was an indictment by a grand jury, I believe in the system. You worked in the system as a prosecutor, but I believe in the system as a former lawyer myself. That yeah, it's fine. They didn't do it, and also I want to get you to respond that they didn't contact your lawyer in advance and say, we want you to surrender, which they would typically do for someone in this kind of case. They arrested her outside of her courthouse, walking in a week later.
Yeah, that's because, all of this is for public consumption. It is for appearances. Frankly, it's for the intimidation value. They're trying to instill fear in the way they're going about law enforcement. And whether it's, on the immigration front, whether it's on, going after universities, going after law firms, whether it's locking up judges, I mean, the fear and the intimidation is the goal. Justice is not the goal. Dean, fear and
Mhm.
intimidation is the goal because Donald Trump is trying to consolidate power. He's trying to become the dictator he wanted to become on day one. He's working on it and he's making progress. But, he is now, and I know we'll get there, also in open defiance of court orders based on what he said over the last 24 hours, which I, as a rule of law guy, you might be surprised that I'm saying this. I welcome him defying Supreme Court orders.
Well, my friend, I'm looking forward to the Nuremberg type trials after this administration's over. And you were a former JAG official lawyer. Maybe you could be involved in actual prosecution. I watched the whole Netflix documentary on the Nuremberg trials recently, and I'm like, that's what we need.
Yeah,
I want to see Trump. I want to see Marco Rubio, Tom Homan, the border czar,
yeah.
Pam Bondi. Now, you did a video about Pam Bondi calling judges deranged and also vowing to this is a message. We're going to go after all of you judges.
Yeah.
The judiciary is the only branch left that is not rolled over. He controls the executive. The Republicans control the Congress. They won't do anything. The last leg standing is the judiciary, and they're going after that now.
Yeah, and Pam Bondi is unworthy of the office of the Attorney General because there are so many judges who are ruling against Donald Trump from coast to coast and at all levels of our federal system, trial court, circuit courts of appeal, and the Supreme Court, that all they have left is to attack the judges and call them names. Pam Bondi called them deranged today. Donald Trump called them, again, radical left lunatic judges. I really wish mainstream media, corporate media, legacy media would question Pam Bondi along the following lines. You say they're deranged. Let's run through some of the judges who have ruled against Donald Trump. Judge John Coffenauer, one of the first federal court judges to say that Donald Trump's attempt to revoke the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship, he said that John Coffenauer, the judge, said your executive order is, quote, blatantly unconstitutional. He was
Yep.
appointed to the bench 40 years ago by President Ronald Reagan. Attorney General Bondi, is he deranged? Don't answer that. What about Judge Wilkinson, Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, also appointed by President Ronald Reagan? And he said if the Trump administration can unconstitutionally deport Abrego Garcia, then they can unconstitutionally deport American citizens, and Trump can unconstitutionally deport his political enemies. Appointed by Ronald Reagan. Attorney General Bondi, is he a deranged judge? What about Judge Trevor McFadden, who said
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump violated the First Amendment by trying to ban the AP, the Associated Press, reporters from White House press conferences and events because it violates the First Amendment? You got freedom of speech, you got freedom of the press. Who appointed that deranged judge, in your opinion? Oh, wait a minute, AG Bondi, that was Donald Trump. Wait, I've got one more for you. What about Judge Terry Dowdy down in
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana, who said he strongly suspects the Trump administration just unconstitutionally deported a 2-year-old American citizen? Who appointed that deranged judge, AG Bondi? Wait a minute, that would be Donald Trump. So here's the question. Why is Donald Trump appointing deranged judges? Well, they're not deranged. You're the one behaving deranged. They're not lunatic, radical, left-wing judges. They are applying the rule of law to Donald Trump's lawless and unconstitutional conduct, period. That is how mainstream media should be going after Pam Bondi and Donald Trump.
Glenn, you should do a one-man show. I'm not kidding. Everyone listening and watching's got it. Like, that was a great monologue. It was almost like something like from a Thurgood Marshall type of thing, but like now you do with Glenn Kirschner. I'm not even kidding. You should tour, get Pete Dominic to open. You tour the country doing this kind of stuff because I think that was sincerely a phenomenal monologue.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Dean, thank you. And Pete would open, but I assume you would close.
No. You'd be the closer. I would be there. I'd be like the manager. I'd be make sure Pete gets there on time. All right, come on, Pete. Stop 5 minutes. Get off the stage. Come on. So I would be lighting him. You mentioned something that happened last night. Two things happened in the ABC News interview with Terry Moran and
Yeah.
Donald Trump. One is Donald Trump said about Abrego Garcia, yes, I could bring him back, but I'm not going to because he's a really bad guy. And even though there's a 9-0 Supreme Court decision that said this regime should facilitate the return, he could pick up the phone and facilitate the return in a heartbeat, and he won't do it. So what's your reaction to that, and what do you think might happen to enforce this order, if anything?
Yeah, this is a beautiful thing. I'm glad he is now openly defying a Supreme Court order and ruling, because I believe that will hasten his demise and it will ultimately spell the political end of Donald Trump. We can talk about why I believe that in a minute, but this is a huge development because Pam Bondi went on record as saying, we can't bring him back. You know, they put in court filings in the Abrego Garcia litigation, he is now in the hands, the possession, the control, the custody of a sovereign nation, El Salvador. We can't possibly bring him back. And Donald Trump on TV just said, of course I can bring him back, but I won't.
Yep.
What does that do? It proves Pam Bondi's a liar. It proves that the DOJ lawyers are liars in the representations they're making in federal court in the Garcia case. And importantly, what Donald Trump just spit out, that I know the Supreme Court told me to, yes, I can do it, but no, I won't do it. That's admissible evidence in the Garcia case. And for anybody scoring at home, it's Federal Rule of Evidence 801D2. It's a statement of a party opponent that is admissible on a contested issue. He just screwed over his own Department of Justice and his own Attorney General by exposing them as liars. But Dean, here's why I say I'm glad he is openly defying Supreme Court rulings and edicts and orders and directives, because he has proven, he's announced himself as a lawless, unconstitutional president who will not obey our constitutional construct of government. He will not abide by Supreme Court orders, and the Supreme Court has the constitutional authority to tell him what he can and can't do, what is and is not constitutional. And by announcing that he is ending our constitutional construct of government, I think that will make the job of the military much easier when they are called upon to act. And here's why I say that. I was an Army JAG active duty 6.5 years. I went to officer basic training, and what was drilled into my head and reinforced when I went to the Army's JAG school on the campus of UVA is that, yes, we must abide by lawful orders, but more importantly, we must disobey unlawful orders. Given that Donald Trump has now announced he's trying to end our constitutional construct of government, and given that he will call on the military, in my opinion, to do things that are unlawful, including perhaps to keep him in power, now that he's announced that he will behave like a dictator, I think it will make their job, their responsibility, their sworn obligation to disobey unlawful orders all the easier, because now it won't be a close call. They have no business keeping an avowed dictator in power.
That's what I hope very much. Just joining us, I'm chatting with our good friend Glenn Kirschner, former federal prosecutor. So, Glenn, something else happened in that interview yesterday. It's something I wrote about a little over a week ago, actually for Substack, and it turned out I didn't expect it. One of the most popular articles I ever wrote. I don't know why, but I was happy it was. You write all these articles, you just hope for the best. It was about Donald Trump had fabricated evidence to keep Rodrigo Garcia in jail. And it was when Donald Trump, like a week and a half ago, posted a picture on Truth Social with a fist of Rodrigo Garcia, and on the knuckles it said MS-13 above it there. And what he wrote accompanying it, Donald Trump, was that it says the words MS-13 on his hand. And some of the corporate media were saying, oh, no, he's just saying the tattoos below that are code for it. And I was saying in my article, look at what he wrote. He is not saying this is code. He is literally saying the man has MS-13 on his hands. And no one brought that up for like a month into this whole debate, because that would be day one stuff. It would be like a mobster having the word mafia tattooed on his hand, or like Cosa Nostra, like on one hand, Cosa Nostra on the other.
He would have a picture of it posted outside the Oval Office, for God's sake.
That would have been so. But now, last night, Trump made it clear it was not a code. He is saying literally the man has MS-13 tie on his hands. And I've had Trump supporters call my show and tell me that. I go, no. Before Trump said, I go, he's not saying that. See, the best argument you got is that was code. No, apparently on the right, they've been saying this on right-wing media, News and Max. He literally has MS-13 on his left hand, and they're hiding his left hand. Trump has fabricated evidence to put someone in jail. And my article was about, if he can do it to him, he'll do it to any of us, anybody. And that's what greatly concerns me. What is your take on Trump last night saying, nope, it says MS-13 on his hand, which it does not. It's insane to say this.
Fabricating evidence to railroad somebody on a charge that is not a righteous charge is a prosecutable offense. Now, given where we are, Dean, the Department of Justice can no longer be viewed as an honest broker of the law, and that is horrific. And it puts us in a really tight spot when you don't have a law enforcement agency that is willing to enforce our nation's laws, our federal laws. So this is a problem that doesn't have an easy solution. The one thing that I think we need to encourage is our state attorneys general and our state and Commonwealth prosecutors and our state's attorneys, like in Maryland, our state district attorneys all around the country, to step into the law enforcement and prosecutorial void. And if things that Trump and his administration officials are doing violate state laws, well, then they need to be prosecuted. The states can't shy away from it. Fani Willis down in Georgia tried to do it, and frankly, that case is not yet over, but it's stalled in the appeals process. They did it out in, I believe, Arizona. I mean, there are states that have taken on, the ruling class criminals who tried to steal the 2020 election. Well, Donald Trump is basically heading up a mafia organization, and we have a crime wave unfolding in our executive branch of our federal government. And if the Department of Justice officials are not going to deal with it, I hope that if they have jurisdiction, some of the states will step into that void and that vacuum.
You talk about like a mafia family running this, and you're 100% right. And on that, it's like the old days of the mafia, they would have the cops on the take, right? Or they'd have the prosecutors on the take or a judge. Now Trump's got his DOJ. And I don't think anyone listening or watching can believe that we have a justice system that cares about justice. All it cares about is Donald Trump. And if you're MAGA, you can commit any federal crime you want. And at the end of the day, I believe Donald Trump will pardon you, especially if it's in the service of him. Because look what he did after January 6th. And your friends like Michael Fanone and Harry Dunn and Sergeant Gonell getting beaten up and attacked. And Trump pardoned all of their attack. They did the attack in the service of one person, Donald Trump. So I think we're going to see a repeat of that. And that incentivizes criminal conduct by some of his supporters.
Yeah, Trump has tried to make the cops the criminals and the criminals the cops. And, we are living in the legal upside down. But, I prosecuted RICO cases, racketeer influenced and corrupt organization cases. And so I don't say flippantly that Donald Trump is running the executive branch like a mob outfit. I really mean it. I mean, I see the makings of a criminal enterprise that could be prosecuted. And for gosh sakes, he's got his underboss in JV. I call him JV Vance because that dude ain't
Oh,
never
that's
going to
good. I like
never going
that.
to make the
Oh,
varsity
JV
the
Vance is very
varsity
good.
team. And it's hard for him to look tough when it looks like he's always auditioning for a Maybelline commercial. But he is the underboss. You've got Pam Bondi, the consigliere, right, doing Donald Trump's dirty work, his dirty lawyer. She's got her capos like Todd Blanche and Emile Beauvais. I mean, Emile Beauvais, high government official, former DOJ official, former criminal defense attorney for Donald Trump, walked into federal court in New York and said, Judge, we're not saying Eric Adams didn't commit all kinds of public corruption crimes. We are trying to dismiss his case because we need to have him do political favors for Donald Trump. I mean, that is the stuff of bar council referral, sanctions, and possible disbarment. And he has been referred to the New York State Bar for that just transparently unethical conduct. This is being run like a mob outfit. Donald Trump is saying, look, hey, that's a nice university you got there. That's a nice law
Yep.
firm you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it. This is right out of Hollywood, but unfortunately, it is our legal hellscape that we're living in.
And just so people don't feel hopeless about some of the legal stuff, you just touched on it in passing. Some of these DOJ lawyers have to worry about getting disbarred after
Yeah.
this is over. They're making arguments to judge where the judge last week said, give me a break to the DOJ lawyer's face, which you wouldn't expect a DOJ lawyer to get that reaction by a federal judge, but it's because there's no basis in law or fact for some of the arguments. And they're going out there and they're saying outrageous things where we saw with Trump after 2020, Rudy Giuliani disbarred. You
Yeah,
could see
Dean,
some of the others.
there are consequences here to the DOJ lawyers who go in and do Donald Trump's dirty bidding. And the consequences are they will be referred to bar counsel, they will be investigated, and they will be sanctioned for their conduct. When you have a judge, Judge Sinis in Maryland, who's presiding over the
Mhm.
Abrego Garcia case, she said two things about the DOJ lawyers. She said, you're providing the court with, quote, falsehoods, and you are acting in, quote, willful and bad faith. Those findings by a federal judge, Dean, will follow those DOJ lawyers right into their bar counsel hearing, and they could be disbarred for that. I'm hoping that that will have a deterrent effect on other DOJ lawyers. When they stand up and try to do the right thing, like the
Mhm.
DOJ lawyer who said we did this in error. This was an administrative error. They're getting fired. They're getting frog marched out of the Department of Justice. But you know what? I would rather, be able to sleep at night and have done the right thing in court and have to resign or be fired than ever suffer, being investigated and disbarred because I fleetingly decided to hitch my wagon to Donald Trump. That doesn't make any
So
damn sense.
no, and Glenn, in case people are listening and they go, well, can't Donald Trump pardon the lawyer so he won't get disbarred? What do you tell them about that?
I tell them that a pardon has absolutely no power in a bar council investigation or sanction or disbarment.
Mhm.
Presidential pardons do not have any effect in those kind of proceedings or even in state court criminal prosecutions. So no, that's one of the few things we don't have to worry about.
Last two things we're seeing reporting. It used to be in DOJ, hundreds of lawyers and staff are leaving the DOJ Civil Rights Division. And the reporting from the New York Times was the reason they're leaving, and some of these lawyers are really great background, top of their class from some top schools. There are people you want in DOJ. They're leaving the Civil Rights Division because it's no longer a Civil Rights Division fighting for people in marginalized community, ensuring their civil rights are protected. No, it's about going after Trump's enemies. They've literally turned the civil rights office on their head. So, what have you heard? I know you still have friends in DOJ. What's your take on this? Anything you've heard?
Yeah, a lot of people are leaving. People are leaving my former professional home, which is the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. That is the DOJ component that prosecutes all the cases, both federally and locally, in Washington, D.C. We are the trial lawyers in Washington, D.C. And people are leaving. They're making the difficult decision to leave a job they love. They've been public servants, they've been representing the interests of the American people, and they're being forced out because their decision is, do I stay and just wait to be fired because I refuse to act unethically and adopt Donald Trump's priorities to engage in revenge instead of engaging in fair prosecutions based on the facts and the law? That's not an easy decision to make. We don't want people to obey in advance, but it's got to be hard to decide, okay, I'm going to stick with this abjectly corrupt administration and Department of Justice to kind of try to be a bulwark inside the department. Boy, that's a thankless task because eventually you're probably going to be shown the door. But yeah, so the damage, the degradation of the Department of Justice being done by Trump and Pam Bondi is just incalculable.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that the 110,000 men and women of the Department of Justice, the overwhelming majority of which are good, hardworking, honest public servants, will be able to weather the storm. They'll be able to stand strong, and we won't lose everything, because if we lose everything, it is going to take one hell of an effort to rebuild the legitimacy of the Department of Justice.
And just briefly, so people understand, if the Civil Rights Division of DOJ is really gutted and re-envisioned as a not to defend people's civil rights, and there's a vast amount of civil rights we have, folks, for different communities, different people, and then turn into a retribution department. What happens when people have their civil rights violated on the federal level? In the past, they could go there. They could have DOJ investigate a police department, let's say, or any entity. What would the practical impact of this?
Yeah, civil rights will no longer be, not only will they no longer be a priority, but they will be under attack.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go back to what we discussed a few minutes ago. The states are going to have to step into that void, because here's something people ought to know. If you commit a federal crime, you almost certainly also commit a state crime. Think about killing a federal officer, because I was in the homicide business for 22 years. If you kill a federal officer, you commit a federal crime because there's a federal hook, there's federal jurisdiction because the victim was a federal officer. But it's also a violation of the state law in which the murder occurred. So that case could be brought federally, it could be brought locally by a state district attorney. So, and that is true with the vast majority of federal laws that are on the books. And that's why I say, even when it comes to violating people's civil rights, the states have to step into the breach, because I don't think we can rely on our Department of Justice to do the work of the American people, at least not for the foreseeable future.
The future might end up being a a union of states, a union of blue states, to be honest, not a civil war scenario, but that we stand together on issue after issue. And even in terms of funding with tax dollars, that's something I spoke to one of the candidates for governor of New Jersey, the leading candidate is a Democrat, and said if she wins, if they're not going to use the tax dollars we give from New Jersey to the federal government, we're going to keep it because it should be for us. And they'll figure out a legal way to do it. Of course, she's a lawyer as well. But so last thing, Glenn, if people want to follow your Substack, and I so appreciate you doing this, and I so appreciate you coming on my SiriusXM radio show over the years. You're one of the best guests. People love you. But where can they follow you? Where do you want them to check out your work?
I mean, you can sign up for Substack. I don't put anything behind a paywall. I know there is a way you can sign up to support my work, but nothing that I put up there is behind a paywall. You can come over to YouTube. You can hit subscribe, also free. We just surpassed 1 million subscribers, so
All
we
right.
continue to
Congratulations.
grow there. You can always come over to Patreon. That's a place where you get all the behind the scenes stuff. But, there are a lot of places you can find me. I'm really digging the Substack. I went to the new media event that was kind of counter programming to the White
Mhm.
House Correspondents' Dinner, met up with a lot of the folks who run Substack, including Hamish McKenzie, great folks. And independent media is where it's at, Dean. That's why I decided to leave MSNBC 6 months early on my contract, because I want to be independent all the time. I jump on Substack Live almost every evening
Yeah,
around
I see
8,
that.
8:30, 9 p.m., depending on what I have going on. People seem to enjoy the daily law talks where we break down the legal issue of the day, translate it from legalese to English, and talk about what's really going on. So right now, I'm really enjoying being on the Substack platform.
That's great. And the irony is that I'm generally independent media, but for the White House Correspondents' Dinner, I was part of MSNBC's coverage, not at the event, in the studio with Eamon. I was there for 3 hours. And it was me and Jason Selvig, who's a comedian, and D Sphere and Molly at times, John Fast. So we were kind of mocking it. But there were more laughs with us on the set than there were over there because they got rid of the comedian at the dinner. All right, Glenn, thank you so much for being on, brother. I really appreciate it. Look forward to chat with you in the future. Thanks for everyone tuning in. I really appreciate everyone who came in and who listened to the show as well. Have a great night, everyone. Take care, my friend.